Hello everyone, my name is Eleanor May Whitaker, and I am 87 years old. People around town call me Miss Ellie. They see a frail woman with silver curls tucked under a sun hat, watering her porch plants every morning at 6:30 sharp. They see an old widow who makes the best apple butter this side of the Mississippi. No one ever sees the girl inside, the one who lived her childhood in constant fear. I sit now in this creaky rocking chair, on a rainy July morning in Willow Creek, Missouri, with a journal in my lap and tears I can no longer hold back. For the first time in 80 years, my silence ends here. Today, when people talk about childhood, they speak of lemonade stands, scraped knees, and fireflies in mason jars. I remember bruises blooming like violets on my arms, the sharp hiss of a belt pulled from its loops, the thunder of boots stomping toward my bedroom door. My father, Emmett Whitaker, was a god in our house. Not the loving, merciful kind, no. The kind who demanded silence. The kind who mistook fear for respect. I was 8 years old the first time he hit me. I dropped a pie my mother asked me to carry. The dish shattered, my palms bleeding, and before I could say sorry, the back of his hand met my cheek with a crack so loud it echoed through the walls. My mother. She didn't speak. She just swept the shards and said, "You should have been more careful, Ellie." I learned then that pain was something I had to hide. Not just from the world but from myself. I told my Sunday school teacher I was clumsy. I wore long sleeves in summer. I smiled through split lips. I became a master of shrinking, of making myself small enough to go unseen. And for decades I never spoke of it. Not to my husband, not to my children, not to anyone. I buried it so deep I began to believe it never happened. But the past doesn't die. It waits. Quietly, until something or someone brings it roaring back. 2 weeks ago I got a letter. A name I hadn't seen in over 50 years. Emmett Whitaker. Not dead. Not buried. But living in a veterans nursing home just 3 counties away. And here's the cruel twist of fate. He's dying now. Alone. And the staff wants to know if I, his only living relative, will come see him. They say he asks for me. The little girl inside me screamed. The woman I am now stayed silent. Until today. Today, with the rain tapping the windows like ghosts long forgotten, I feel something rise in me. A fire. A reckoning. I reach for my coat. Not to forgive. Not to forget. But to face what I've run from my entire life. I don't know what I'll find when I walk into that room. But I do know this. The silence ends now. The drive from Willow Creek to the Valley Pines Veterans Home took an hour and 13 minutes. I counted every mile in silence. My hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, knuckles white as bone, the wind brushing the tops of cornfields that lined the highway like stiff rows of soldiers. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, the kind that make you feel like the world is holding its breath. I hadn't driven this far in months, not since my hip surgery, but this wasn't about convenience. This wasn't even about curiosity. It was about something I couldn't name. Something clawing at the inside of my chest like a locked-up secret begging for daylight. As I drove, my mind slipped against my will, into memories I tried to drown. I was 12 when I stopped calling him Daddy. He had been drinking. Again. Mama had burned the roast and I had spoken up. Maybe we can just have bread and jam. My voice barely above a whisper. I meant well. I was only trying to soften the moment, but Emmett's face twisted into something ugly. His hands flew faster than I could run. My lips split open like a cherry. Mama cried but never moved. I slept in the barn that night, curled between hay bales and mice, listening to the whistle of the wind and wondering if other girls my age felt like prisoners too. By 16 I knew I'd leave. And I did. On a foggy morning I packed 2 dresses, my diary, and a photo of Mama smiling before she turned to stone. I boarded a Greyhound bus to Oklahoma and never looked back. Until now. I pulled into the gravel lot of Valley Pines around noon. The building looked like any other. Red brick, aluminum ramp, tidy shrubs. But to me it felt like walking into a cave where the monster never died, just got older. Inside, the halls smelled of antiseptic and fading time. A nurse with kind eyes led me toward room 204. "Are you Eleanor?" she asked. I nodded. Her voice lowered. "He's been asking for you." I didn't respond. I couldn't trust my voice. When we reached the door, my legs froze. I heard the slow rattling sound of a man breathing through tubes, the click of a monitor, the whisper of someone fading, and suddenly I wasn't 87 anymore. I was 7, standing barefoot on cracked kitchen tile, trying not to cry as my father shouted at the radio for playing the wrong song. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was Eleanor May Whitaker, a woman who raised 3 daughters, a woman who buried a husband, a woman who had survived her worst days without letting them define her. I reached for the doorknob with a shaking hand. Click. The door creaked open. There he was, sunken, pale. His once dreaded frame now swallowed by hospital blankets. He turned his head slowly and looked me straight in the eyes. His voice rasped. "Ellie, is it really you?" I opened my mouth, but before I could answer, the flood of 60 years rose in my throat like fire. And I whispered, "Why now?" His eyes were sunken foggy, like old glass that hadn't been wiped in decades. He blinked at me uncertain. The strength in his voice was gone, but the words still stung. "Ellie," he rasped again, "you got tall." It nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. Tall? After all these years, that's what he remembered? I stood in the doorway, stiff and hollow, my purse still hanging from my shoulder like I hadn't meant to stay. The nurse had quietly slipped away. It was just the 2 of us now. I stepped in slowly, each step echoing through a lifetime. He looked smaller than I remembered. His shoulders no longer carried storms, just tubes and brittle bones. His hands, once fists of fury, now trembled slightly against the blanket. But I remembered. I remembered everything. I remembered the way he'd slam the screen door so hard it'd pop off the hinges. I remembered the time he forced me to kneel on rice for hours because I left a book out on the porch. I remembered hiding my little sister, Lucy, in the attic while I took the beating for both of us. I remembered Mama humming in the kitchen like nothing was wrong. I remembered praying desperately to a God I wasn't even sure existed, asking, "Please let him be different tomorrow." He never was. "Do you remember what you did to me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He blinked again, looked away, out the window. Silence. I sat slowly, in the vinyl chair by his bed. It groaned under my weight, as if resisting the conversation. His jaw moved, as if he wanted to say something, but then nothing. "I remember," I said. "Every bruise, every scream, every time you made me feel like I was nothing." His lip trembled. Then suddenly, he let out a breathy laugh. Soft. Sad. "I don't remember much," he said. "The war, the drink, it all took things away. My memories come in pieces now. But I remember your hair. You had those golden braids. You looked like your mother." A lump formed in my throat. "That woman," he continued, his eyes drifting to a spot on the wall. "She stopped loving me long before I ever raised my hand. But I didn't stop her from leaving scars either." His voice cracked. "I wasn't a father. I was just angry. I felt something shift inside me, not forgiveness, not yet, but something. Maybe understanding? Or maybe it was grief, rising from a well I thought had long dried up." I pulled a tissue from my purse and dabbed my eyes. "You stole my youth," I said softly. "But I never gave you my future." His eyes met mine then, a flicker of something like regret behind the glaze. "I deserve to die alone," he whispered. I didn't correct him. I didn't hold his hand. I didn't promise anything. But I stayed, because sometimes strength isn't in walking away. It's in being the witness to someone else's reckoning. And in that moment, sitting beside the man who ruined my childhood, I realized something else. He may forget, but I will remember everything. That night, back in my small apartment at Marigold Pines Retirement Village, the air felt heavier than usual. The heater rattled in the corner. Rain tapped against the window like the past trying to find its way back in. I sat in my old rocking chair with a wool blanket over my lap and a pen trembling between my fingers. I hadn't written in years. Not like this. Not from the gut. But when I got home from Valley Pines that day, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in decades. And there it was, my old journal. The one with the sunflower cover. Faded, worn, nearly falling apart. The pages smelled like time. And I began writing. Not because I thought he'd read it. Not because I thought it would change anything. But because I couldn't keep this all inside anymore. Dear Emmett, you once told me that real pain makes you stronger. I believed you. And that belief nearly ruined me. I spent my entire youth thinking I was the problem. I thought if I were quieter, prettier, smarter, you wouldn't hurt me. I thought your anger was my fault. I thought love was supposed to bruise. I learned how to hide. I learned how to smile when I wanted to scream. I became a master of pretending everything was okay. At school and church, even when I became a mother myself. But now I know. I wasn't the broken one. You were. And you passed your brokenness down like a family heirloom. But I refused to wear it. I raised my children with gentleness. I apologized when I was wrong. I gave them what you never gave me, safety. You see, you didn't win. You didn't destroy me. You taught me who not to become. I stopped writing then. The tears came so suddenly I didn't have time to catch them. I rocked gently the way I used to rock my daughters when they cried in the middle of the night. My mind drifted back to the years I spent lying awake in silence, afraid of footsteps in the hallway. I remembered hiding the broken plate Mama dropped, so she wouldn't catch the back of his hand. I remembered learning to read in the dark because he hated the sound of my voice reading aloud. I remembered the one time he looked proud of me, when I punched a boy in the 5th grade for calling Lucy weird. He laughed. You got fire in you, girl, he said. I hated that moment more than any other, because part of me had wanted his approval. Even then, even after everything. I folded the letter and placed it in an envelope. I didn't write his name on the front. I wasn't sure if I'd give it to him. Maybe I'd burn it. Maybe I'd leave it on his bedside table when he was asleep. Maybe I'd bury it under a tree. But writing it made something shift. It made the silence inside me smaller. It made the ache a little quieter. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt the weight of his legacy lift just a little. The next morning I woke up early, made coffee, pulled on my cardigan, looked out the window, and said to myself, I'm going back tomorrow, because this story wasn't over. Not yet. The next day, the sky was a soft gray blanket stretched across the horizon. I brought the letter with me, still sealed, still uncertain. I didn't know what I'd do with it. Maybe I'd finally speak the words out loud. Maybe I'd just sit by his side and wait for some divine signal that never came. But when I stepped into his room at Valley Pines, someone was already there. She was standing near the window, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Auburn hair streaked with silver, pale eyes behind wireframe glasses. I hadn't seen her in over 40 years. Wendy, I said like I wasn't sure if the ghost was real. She turned. Ellie, she said, her voice catching. I heard he was dying. My baby sister. My Lucy. I hadn't called her that in decades. Wendy and I had drifted apart years ago. Not because of a fight, but because silence can grow roots too deep to untangle. She moved to Oregon in her 20s, married a kind man named Martin, had 2 boys, sent Christmas cards for a while. Then the cards stopped. Life got in the way. We never talked about what happened in that house. We never said the word abuse. We just moved on. Or at least tried to. She motioned toward the bed. He doesn't even recognize me. I nodded. Wendy looked different. Older, yes, but still gentle. Still the girl who used to sleep in my bed when the screams got too loud. He looks so small, she whispered. I stared at the man hooked to machines, his mouth open slightly, muttering something unintelligible. I always thought I'd feel something, she said. Hate. Anger. But I don't. I just feel tired. I swallowed hard. I wrote him a letter. I said, pulling it from my purse. I thought maybe I'd read it to him. Or leave it. I don't know. Wendy sat in the chair beside me, her knees cracking softly as she bent down. I always wanted to forget, she said, eyes glossy. But you never did you? No, I whispered. I remembered for both of us. She reached for my hand. I saw what you did for me, Ellie, she said. You think I don't remember, but I do. You took the worst of it. You protected me when Mama wouldn't. I never thanked you. I never even asked if you were okay. I couldn't stop the tears. We sat there, 2 old women in a sterile room, finally saying the words we never dared say. Wendy continued. I came to say goodbye. But maybe it's time to say something else too. I looked at the letter. I had written it for myself. But maybe it was time for him to hear it, even if his mind was too far gone to grasp the weight of my words. Maybe it wasn't about him understanding. Maybe it was about me letting go. I unfolded the letter with trembling hands. Wendy held my shoulder and I began to read. Every word of the pain, the silence, the survival. My voice cracked. I cried halfway through. But I finished. When I looked up, he was staring at the ceiling, his eyes wet. "I'm sorry," he whispered, barely audible. It didn't fix anything, but it was something. That night, Wendy and I had dinner together at a local diner. We laughed. We cried. We promised to stay in touch. Because sometimes healing doesn't come from apologies. Sometimes it comes from finally being seen. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone in the memory. A week passed. Wendy flew back to Oregon, and I stayed in my quiet little apartment at Marigold Pines, watching the seasons begin to shift. Summer was melting into fall. The leaves, once vibrant and alive, now danced toward the earth like soft goodbyes. I thought the letter would be the end of it, that maybe the tears I shed beside that hospital bed had washed away the last of it. But healing isn't a straight line. Sometimes it sneaks up on you in the form of a memory you didn't know you still carried. Came to me one morning. I was folding laundry of all things when I suddenly froze, a shirt clutched in my hands. The smell of fresh cotton triggered something deep, buried. I remembered it clearly. The dress. I was 7 years old. Mama had sewn it for me. Light blue with tiny white buttons. I loved that dress. I wore it for church and spun in the mirror hoping anyone would tell me I looked nice. That Sunday I dropped jelly on the front during breakfast. Just a small stain. I didn't think it mattered. But he did. I still remember how the belt felt across my back. The sound of Mama humming in the kitchen, pretending she couldn't hear. The sharp sting. The taste of blood in my mouth when I bit my tongue trying not to scream. I remember lying on the floor afterward, the dress bunched up under me like it had betrayed me too. And I remember thinking, if I disappear, maybe he won't see me anymore. That was the day I started shrinking. That's the day I stopped dancing in mirrors. I dropped the shirt and sat down on the edge of my bed, trembling. After all these years, that one memory still burned. But something was different now. I wasn't that little girl anymore. I looked around my room, photos of my daughters on the dresser, books stacked high, a quilt I'd stitched myself over the years. I had built a life, a gentle one, a home filled with laughter and forgiveness. And even though I never had a mother who held me when I cried, I became one. I became the woman I needed. That realization hit like a soft sunrise after a long night. He had taken so much from me, but he didn't take everything. I pulled out an old photo album and flipped through it. There I was at 30 holding baby Grace. There was Emily's graduation, my wedding anniversary, Wendy's visit when the girls were little. There was joy in those pictures. Proof that I hadn't just survived, I had lived. The scars were still there, but they no longer controlled me. And in that moment I promised myself, I would speak. I would write. I would not let my story die in whispers. Because if my pain had taught me anything, it's this. Silence protects no one. I opened my laptop, typed the title. When the belt replaced the hug. A daughter's memoir. Not for revenge. Not for sympathy. But for the little girl in the blue dress. So she could know she mattered. So she could know she survived. So she could know she finally had a voice. 6 months later, I held a warm paperback in my hands. The cover was soft matte, with a faded photograph of a little girl's shadow on a wooden porch. The title stretched across the top in simple, honest lettering. When the belt replaced the hug. A Daughter's Memoir. By Eleanor May Whitlow. I stared at my name in print. Didn't feel real. 87 years old, and here I was, an author. When the first copy arrived in the mail, I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I sat quietly at the table in my little kitchen and just breathed. It was the first breath I'd taken that didn't carry his weight. I had no idea what would happen when I decided to publish it. Grace was stunned. She didn't even know half the stories inside. Why didn't you ever tell us? She'd asked, her voice shaking. Because I didn't know how to. Because the shame never left my bones. Even when the bruises did. But the book changed everything. Word spread faster than I expected. It started with a local book club, then the community newsletter, then a short feature in the Sunday edition of the Bayview Sentinel. A few weeks later, an email came from a therapist in upstate New York who said she was using my memoir in her women's trauma group. "I read your story to them," she wrote. "One of my patients said she didn't feel invisible anymore." I sat at my desk, rereading that line until my vision blurred. All I had done was tell the truth, and that truth was healing others. Then came the day I was invited to speak. The director of a small women's shelter in Charleston called me. Her name was June, and she had read the memoir 3 times. "We'd love to have you talk to our residents," she said. "You don't have to be anything fancy. Just yourself. Just honest." I said yes. I didn't sleep the night before the event. I wore a simple blue blouse and a silver pendant Grace had given me for my 80th birthday. Wendy flew out to be by my side. She squeezed my hand backstage. "They need to hear you," she whispered. And so did I. When I stepped up to the podium, I looked out at 20 women seated in folding chairs. Some clutched tissues. Others kept their eyes down. And then I saw her. A girl who couldn't have been more than 16. She looked just like me in that old church dress. Fragile. Faking brave. I cleared my throat. "My name is Eleanor May Whitlow," I began. "And I was hurt by the man who was supposed to protect me." Silence. Then one by one the women began to nod. I didn't need notes. I spoke from memory. I told them about the belt, the silence, the bruises hidden beneath sweaters, the years I lost pretending everything was fine. I told them about the book, about reclaiming my name, and about the day I realized I wasn't just a survivor. I was a storyteller, a witness, a warrior. When I finished, the applause wasn't loud, but it was real. That 16-year-old girl came up to me after, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you," she said. "You made me feel less broken." I hugged her tight. She didn't have to say anything more. I knew that feeling. I knew it deep. And I knew, finally, that what had once been my deepest wound was now someone else's first light. A month after the Charleston event, just as autumn began coloring the trees outside marigold pines in warm oranges and reds, something unexpected arrived in the mailroom. A plain envelope. No return address. Just my full name, written in shaky cursive. I nearly tossed it. But something made me pause. I opened it slowly, sitting at the small wooden table by the window, my tea still steeping. Inside was a letter. 3 pages folded neatly. The handwriting was uneven, like the hand of someone unsure if they should even be writing at all. The first word stopped me cold. "Eleanor. If you're reading this, it means I'm already gone." My heart went still. It was from my father. I didn't cry. Not at first. I just stared at the paper, unsure if I wanted to read what came next. But I did. "I know I don't deserve your time," he wrote. "But before I left this world, I needed you to know something." His words stumbled, full of broken sentences and unfinished thoughts. He spoke of his own father, how harsh he'd been, how anger lived in their house like a permanent guest, how he had learned to hit before he learned to love. "I thought fear would keep you safe. I didn't understand the damage until it was too late." It was no excuse, but it was something. He wrote about watching me grow up from a distance even though he was right there. Watching me shrink, stay quiet, disappear. "I saw what I did to you, and I didn't stop. I want to say sorry, but that word feels like dust now." There in the folds of the letter was shame. Not healing, not redemption, but regret. The kind that comes too late. He died in a nursing home 2 counties over. Alone. The staff had found a box of belongings, and this letter labeled with my name. Somehow it found its way to me. I held it in my lap, my hands trembling. I didn't know how to feel. There was no comfort in the letter, but there was a kind of finality. He had never once said, "I'm sorry," out loud, but he wrote it, and that meant something even if it didn't erase the past. That night I sat by the fire in the lounge, the letter beside me, untouched since that first reading. Grace called asking how my week was. I didn't mention the letter. Not yet. Some wounds are shared when you're ready, not before. Later, I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the back of my memoir. Not as forgiveness, but as proof. He finally saw what he did. even if the recognition came at the very end. And that acknowledgement didn't free him. It freed me. Wendy and Grace came to visit the following weekend. Wendy brought a bouquet of sunflowers. Grace brought her famous blueberry muffins still warm, wrapped in a dish towel that smelled like home. We sat in my small living room at Marigold Pines, the three of us women, 3 generations of silent strength. They had read the book. I knew they had, but we hadn't spoken about it. Not really. Until that day. Wendy was the first to break the silence. "Mom," she said gently, "we had no idea." Her voice trembled. "You were always strong. But we didn't know why. We didn't know what shaped you." I nodded, sipping tea, the steam curling up into the quiet space between us. "I didn't want you to carry it," I said. "It was mine to hold. Or so I thought." Grace wiped a tear from her cheek. "All those years, we thought you were just a private person. Reserved. But you were surviving." I reached for their hands, one on each side. "I didn't want to poison your childhood with mine," I whispered. "But silence doesn't protect. It only isolates." I told them everything that wasn't in the book. The nights I hid under my bed. The times I wished I had someone else's mother. Someone who would have fought for me. The way I trained myself to smile just enough, cry only in secret, and never speak unless I was asked. I told them about the letter. My father's last words. Wendy looked stunned. Grace looked furious. "Do you believe him?" Grace asked. I thought for a moment. I believe he finally saw what he'd done. But I don't think he ever truly understood the cost. Wendy squeezed my hand. "He doesn't get to define your story anymore. You do." That afternoon we went outside. The air was crisp with October's breath. Leaves scattered like confetti along the path. We sat on the bench by the pond where ducks swam, unbothered by the world's pain. I watched my daughters, grown women now, sitting beside me, the pain of generations slowly dissolving into something new. Truth. Connection. Healing. Not every story has a happy ending. But this chapter? This one was beautiful. Because for the first time in my life, I felt seen by the people I loved most. And for a woman who had spent decades hiding in plain sight, that meant everything. It was a Thursday morning when the air changed. Not in a dramatic way. No storm clouds or booming thunder. Just a stillness that settled into my bones as if the universe were finally quiet. I woke early as I always did, my old joints creaking like floorboards. The sunlight peeked through the curtains in golden threads. Something about that morning felt different. I made a cup of tea, sat in my rocker by the window, and looked out across the grounds of Marigold Pines. The maples were losing their last leaves, bare limbs reaching like arms ready to let go. And I realized, so was I. For nearly 89 years, I had lived in silence, shame, and shadow. The weight of my father's cruelty, my mother's indifference, and the years of pretending had clung to me like a second skin. But now the truth had been spoken. My daughters knew me, really knew me, and loved me still. The memoir was finished. The letter from my father had been read. There were no more ghosts hiding behind doors. I had nothing left to fear. And for the first time, I felt free. Later that day, I took a walk to the garden. The nurses offered to come with me, but I waved them off with a smile. My cane tapped a steady rhythm on the cobblestones as I moved past the blooming chrysanthemums. I stopped at the bench near the willow tree, the one that had become mine. As I sat down, I breathed in the crisp autumn air and exhaled everything that had ever tried to bury me. The memories, the bruises, the silence, all of it, gone with the wind. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I saw her, little Eleanor, the girl who used to tremble at footsteps in the hall, the girl who used to bite her tongue until it bled. The girl who once believed that pain was love. She was no longer afraid. She looked at me and smiled. "You did it," she said. "You made it through." And I whispered back, "Yes, darling. We made it." Television subscribe for more heartfelt stories like this one. Because sometimes healing begins with a story. Speech balloon comment below if this story touched you. Share it with someone who might need to be reminded.